Process benchmarking is the next thing we can do to affect improvement in a process. The purpose of benchmarking is to accelerate change in an organization, and it can something that will lead to continual improvement in products, processes, or service, enhance customer satisfaction, competitive advantage, and also make business process improvements. Benchmarking is actually a learning process where we learn from other organizations who've been recognized at having better performance in a particular aspect of their operations, whether it be products, services, or processes. So when we talk about process benchmarking, there are actually 4 different categories of process benchmarking. The first is called strategic benchmarking, and here's where we're benchmarking business strategy or process objectives. This is outside the scope of the green belt work, typically done by a master black belt or a black belt. What you will be focusing on is perhaps operational benchmarking, where we're benchmarking the performance of work processes or practices, and we're reviewing productivity improvement opportunities or alternatives that will increase efficiency, effectiveness, or economy of operations. You may also be working on performance benchmarking, where we're taking a look at comparative performance of products or services using the outcome as a standard of comparison under sort of known performance conditions. The final type of benchmarking is called perceptual benchmarking. And typically this is a black belt level or maybe even master black belt level type of project. But here the benchmarking is about the feelings, attitudes, or motivations of individuals in the process. So looking at either customers perhaps or employees in terms of understanding their attitudes about products or services based on their receipt of that product and then what they think or feel about it. Now, we will be looking at this idea of benchmarking in terms of how companies cooperate in that process. Now, there's actually sort of a different approach in terms of DMAIC when it comes to benchmarking. So for instance, define is about sharing, understanding a benchmarking event that could be shared among companies. So who should be the partner? How do you select them? How do you build this collaborative environment? The measure phase is done independently within the 2 companies. Each company evaluating a set of performance measures that are agreed upon, and for a process whose scope has also been agreed upon. The analyze phase is typically a shared event, where we take the 2 analyses done independently by the companies, and then we compare them to understand what is the gap in performance, who's doing this better, and try to understand why. Improve then becomes also an independent event, where each organization is making improvements based on the discovery and the learning they've had from the sharing experience. Now, benchmarking was originally classified by the source of data, and so that wasn't as helpful as understanding what it is you're actually doing. But it is important to understand where does the data come from and what data quality is there. So for instance, competitive benchmarking is an approach where we're looking at what is actually happening at one's direct competitors. That's very helpful in terms of giving your management a wake-up call, but it doesn't really help you at the work process level because your competition usually won't tell you what exactly they're doing that gives them an advantage. Internal benchmarking is much more helpful because there you're taking a look at the same processes being conducted at different iterations of the company, maybe a different factory or a different production line. This is very helpful if you're a large corporation, but small corporations might not have the scale for doing this. So as we're talking about a small and medium enterprise, this also is probably not a very helpful thing to do because we don't have so much, if you will, internal. Industry benchmarking is an interesting approach because here we're taking a look at collaboration across the same function within an industry. And this may have, if you will, more capability to get at competitive information or to get at higher quality information than competitive benchmarking, because there's less likelihood that you're a direct competitor. So you may take a look at chemicals and process industry, for instance, and so you could look from the steel industry to, say, the chemicals industry, and say, how do you manage process control? So that might be something where you're taking a look at something much better. So the understanding is that you could take advantage of the functional knowledge of professional networks, but the disadvantage is that this functional concentration tends to reinforce lessons already learned within that industry. The best approach to benchmarking is to look for generic data or generic processes. This is where you're understanding who is the best at doing a particular function or process independent of the industry they come from. And this is going to be most helpful because what it gives you is the greatest opportunity to organize process breakthrough, because you're going to study something from a totally different perspective that's outside the, if you will, boundary conditions of your own industry and your own company. Well, what are we looking for? Well, in benchmarking, we're looking for a performance gap. We have our own performance is one line, that's a baseline, and then we take a look, who's better? So this is the benchmark performance. The difference between those two is this performance gap we'd like to close. Now we're going to learn 3 different types of lessons when we go through the benchmarking process. One is a gain that's coming from entitlement. Entitlement are those gains when we take a look at our process and we realize we're doing something stupid. We should stop doing that. If I'm hitting myself in the head and I'm having a headache, stop hitting myself in the head. So take the waste out of the process, take the loss out of the process. So this can be actually creating a series of lean types of projects. Another type of improvement we can have is improvement based on just what we've observed. And so we take a look and we see, what are they doing? Okay, and we can create a parity goal or an improvement goal that's related to the lessons we see that someone else has done. But there's also a chance to have a third type of goal. The third type of goal is a stretch goal. Now, the stretch goal comes when we realize that the improvements made by this benchmark company, while they're significant, they didn't take advantage of today's technology, or they didn't take advantage of lessons learned by other organizations. And certainly, they had made some mistakes, which, if corrected in the process, could have been done much better. So here's a chance where we have an opportunity to adapt the lessons that we've learned and create perhaps even higher level performance because we have better technology, and do it faster because we don't have to relearn the same lessons. So the benchmarking process model follows a plan, do, check, act sequence: planning the study, collecting the data, analyzing the data, then adapting and improving. So we plan the study. We're doing basically the same sorts of things we do in DMA. We're trying to understand, what should we actually be trying to get out of this process? What are the benefits we're looking for? What is the process actually doing? So that's like the measure phase. So we're defining the problem, like define in DMAIC, and we're measuring the process and understand it. Then we collect data. We collect our own data, and then we collect primary data, that's our own data, and then primary data from the other company. That's where they're doing their own analysis, and they provide us with the same data. So we have to calibrate the measurement systems. Are we measuring the same thing in the same way? Are we agreeing about the statistical application of it? It's not just a single point of data, but it's over some extended period of time, maybe at different locations, and so forth. So we have to have very good agreement for what it is we're measuring. That will go into the benchmarking agreement that we have with them, and how we actually create, if you will, a data collection plan that's used at both of the organizations for collecting the comparative data. So that's done independently. The analyzed data is where we aggregate the data from the two organizations, we nominalize the performance so we can understand exactly how to make this comparison, and then we take a look at the gaps and understand what are the root causes. So this gives us the identification of performance improvement, one organization over another for the same process, and then we take a look inside their process. What were the things that enabled that performance? Was it training? Was it equipment? Was it process design? And all of those things, those process enablers then, become evaluated in terms of what can we then bring into our own organization. And that's when we reach this improve phase. So we can set gaps to enclose, exceed this gap performance perhaps with stretch goals. And we can modify those enablers that we see based on the culture, the process maturity that we have, and what we should do. Out of this, we create the improvement plan. So what do you do after the benchmarking study? We adapt lessons learned about improvement to the culture of our organization. We design an improvement implementation plan, and then we execute the implementation plan. We'll talk about implementation planning at the end of this whole series of modules in the DMAIC Improve phase.